if there's one thing we know about Bo Xilai is that he exuded ambition, and he exuded ambition, obviously, to join the next central leadership, not necessarily as top leader, but certainly as one of the top handful of leaders. And so this is a time in the Chinese political cycle when there's a great deal of contention, negotiation, horse trading about who is going to go into the next central leadership. And we don't know exactly what Bo Xilai's ambitions were, but it does seem to pretty clear that he wanted to be a powerful member of the next central leadership, and perhaps most likely he wanted to take over from Zhou Yongkang as the next leader of the domestic policing and security apparatus. So this is all breaking out at the very worst time for Bo Xilai. This breakdown of relations between Gu Kailai and Neil Haywood, the death of Neil Haywood, it's all happening at a time that, if it came out, would be fatal to Bo Xilai's chances of getting into the next central leadership. So I think that's part of the context which is happening here as well, that insofar as Wang Lijun is involved in a cover-up of Neil Haywood's death, that is an enormous political asset for anybody who knows about all of that.
So let's finish the narrative through his eventual court case. How does this how does this all end for Bo?
Well, it ends in extraordinarily dramatic fashion. And if you go back to February, that's from February onward, these stories are beginning to emerge about the death of Neil Haywood, the possible role of the family and Gu Kailai in Neil Haywood's death. While all of this is going on, Bo Xilai is maintaining a semblance of normality, and he remains a high-profile politician. He remains the party secretary of Chongqing. And so when the National People's Congress comes around in early March, just as he does every year, he turns up at the National People's Congress. And in previous years, he'd always been sort of very high-profile politician at these events, stopping to give doorstops for journalists, foreign and Chinese, giving press conferences for Chongqing, which attracted large numbers of journalists interested in what was happening there. But this particular NPC was very different because now it was happening at a time when this scandal was beginning to break out, and there was already an investigation underway that, as we learned subsequently, was pointing very directly to Bo Xilai and his family. So he was under enormous pressure then, but somehow he still managed to maintain this veneer of normality. And one of the most extraordinary episodes during that National People's Congress in early March is that there were a couple of days when Bo Xilai disappeared from proceedings, and nobody was quite sure why. And there were rumors then that he was soon to fall. He could be in serious trouble. But then, I forget what day, but a few days before the end of the National People's Congress, Bo Xilai calls a press conference in the Great Hall of the People, in which he gives an hours-long defense of himself and his policies in Chongqing to a packed room of journalists. And I was in there for that. And I remember coming out of that thinking, this guy is so confident. He must know that the central leadership has his back. Otherwise, he wouldn't have walked in and out of that room with a sort of air of cocky confidence that that right was on his side and he was going to get through this. And I remember thinking then that, oh, this looks like Bo Xilai is going to survive all of this. And that was a few days before the end of the National People's Congress. At the very end of that National People's Congress, Premier Wen Jiabao gives a press conference in which I think he discloses for the first time just the the level of unhappiness with Bo Xilai within the leadership. He makes these very pointed warnings about Bo Xilai's political ambitions, and in particular, makes a pointed warning about politicians who are tempted to go back to the past in China and to revive, some of the policies and practices of the Cultural Revolution years. And so then again, the pendulum shifts again, and you start thinking, well, what is going on now? Bo Xilai may be in trouble. What I didn't expect after that news conference ended, though, was that Bo Xilai would be deposed from power and detained the very next day after that news conference. So obviously, while all of this is happening in the Great Hall of the People, in the National People's Congress, there are movements behind the scenes that means that the central leadership at some point during those weeks or days reaches the decision that the criminal case against Gu Kailai and Bo Xilai is so damning, and that Bo Xilai has conducted himself in a way that is so dangerous that he has to be taken down. And that's what they did.